You know, there's something quite peculiar about our relationship with suffering. We spend our entire lives trying to escape it, to push it away, to numb it with endless distractions, and yet it follows us like our own shadow. And what's most curious is that the very thing we're running from might be the very doorway to what we've been seeking all along. Consider for a moment that your suffering isn't merely an unfortunate accident, a cosmic error in need of correction, but rather a form of communication. What if the universe, or what some might call God, is actually speaking to you through your pain? Not because there's some sadistic desire to watch you struggle, but because suffering creates the necessary opening for something profound to emerge. When we're comfortable, we rarely question the nature of our existence. Like fish unaware of the water they swim in, we move through life, accepting the illusion that what we perceive is all there is. But pain cracks that comfortable shell of assumptions. It disrupts the trance of ordinary consciousness. This is precisely why the great spiritual traditions have always recognized suffering as a gateway. The Buddha built his entire teaching around the recognition of suffering and its transcendence. Christ spoke from the cross. These weren't accidental elements of spiritual teachings, but central insights into the mechanism of awakening. What makes suffering so powerful is that it confronts us with a fundamental paradox of existence. We believe ourselves to be separate entities seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, and yet the very pain we avoid contains the message that this separation is an illusion. The suffering itself is trying to show us something beyond our limited perspective. Have you ever noticed that in your moments of greatest pain, something shifts in your awareness? The normal boundaries of your identity begin to dissolve. The stories you tell yourself about who you are become transparent. There's a curious opening that occurs precisely when we can no longer maintain our usual strategies of control. What might it be like to approach your suffering not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a messenger carrying a letter you've been waiting for your entire life? I invite you to reflect on this question. What if your pain isn't meaningless, but is actually the universe's most direct way of communicating with you? The insight here isn't that suffering is good or that we should seek it out, but rather that when it inevitably arrives, it contains within it the seeds of a profound transformation of consciousness. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself, a moment when something broke you open, and in that breaking, a new kind of seeing became possible. The modern world has become particularly skilled at avoiding this message. We've created endless ways to distract ourselves from pain, to medicate it away, to theorize it into abstraction. And yet, despite all our sophisticated evasions, suffering persists, not as punishment, but as invitation. We find ourselves caught in an exquisite paradox. We cannot force ourselves to hear what suffering has to say by intentionally seeking pain. And yet when pain finds us, as it inevitably will, we can choose how we relate to it. Will we continue the age-old pattern of resistance, or might we bring a quality of curious attention to our experience? Think of how a mother relates to the pain of childbirth. There's an acceptance, even an embrace of the pain, not because the pain itself is desirable, but because it serves as the gateway to new life. What if all suffering carried a similar potential within it, the birth of a new kind of consciousness? When we look closely at our experience of suffering, we discover something remarkable. The pain itself is rarely what causes our deepest suffering. Rather, it's our resistance to the pain, our elaborate strategies to avoid feeling what is actually happening. We suffer most intensely from our attempts to escape suffering. This is why presence with our pain can be so transformative, not as a masochistic exercise, but as a profound recognition that what we've been fleeing contains precisely what we've been seeking. A direct encounter with reality as it is, unfiltered by our conceptual overlays. The ancients understood what modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover, that trauma and transformation are intimately connected. The wound becomes the opening. The break becomes the breakthrough. but only when we stop running long enough to receive the message that's been trying to reach us all along. In the Zen tradition, there's a beautiful metaphor. Our ordinary consciousness is like a cup filled to the brim with our preconceptions, our certainties, our fixed ideas about ourselves and the world. Suffering is what empties the cup, creating space for a new kind of knowing to emerge. Not the accumulation of more concepts, but a direct perception of reality that transcends our usual subject-object division. Have you noticed how suffering tends to strip away what's non-essential? In our deepest pain, the social masks drop away. Our concerns about status and appearance fade into irrelevance, and we're confronted with the bare fact of existence itself. There's an authenticity, a raw truth to suffering that cuts through layers of pretense. I wonder, what has your suffering been trying to tell you? If you could listen to it not as an adversary, but as a messenger, what might you hear? When we begin to shift our relationship with suffering, something remarkable happens. We don't necessarily suffer less, at least not immediately, but the quality of our suffering changes. It becomes transparent, revealing dimensions of reality that remain hidden in ordinary states of consciousness. The great mystery here is that what speaks through our suffering isn't separate from what we are at the most fundamental level. The message and the messenger, the speaker and the listener, are ultimately revealed to be expressions of the same underlying reality. God speaks through our suffering because God isn't out there sending messages in here, but is the very fabric of existence itself, which includes both our suffering and our awareness of it. This insight isn't meant to be merely intellectual. It's an invitation to a direct exploration of your own experience. The next time suffering arises, what would happen if, instead of immediately trying to escape it or fix it, you approached it with a genuine curiosity, not forcing yourself to feel what you don't feel, but simply being willing to listen to what your experience might be trying to show you? There's a beautiful paradox here. The more fully we can be with our suffering, the more we discover that we are not limited to it. Our awareness, which can hold the experience of suffering, is itself free from suffering. Like the sky that remains unharmed by the storms that pass through it, something in us remains untouched, even by our deepest pain. The spiritual journey isn't about escaping the human condition, but about discovering what we are that can fully embrace the human condition, including its inevitable suffering. And in that embrace, we find a freedom and fulfillment that doesn't depend on the absence of pain. When we begin to experience this directly, not just as a concept, but as a lived reality, our relationship with suffering undergoes a profound transformation. We no longer see it as an obstacle to our happiness, but recognize it as an integral aspect of a life fully lived, a necessary note in the symphony of existence. This doesn't mean we become passive in the face of unnecessary suffering or injustice. Quite the contrary. When we're no longer driven by our personal fear of pain, we can respond to the suffering in the world with greater clarity and compassion. Our action comes not from reaction, but from a deep recognition of our interconnectedness with all life. The great joke in all of this is that what we discover through the doorway of our suffering is the joy that was already here all along, hidden in plain sight. Not a joy dependent on circumstances, but the joy of being itself, which can accommodate the full range of human experience, including grief and pain. This is why the mystics and sages often seem paradoxically both deeply serious and profoundly playful. They've discovered that at the heart of reality, beyond our conceptual divisions of pleasure and pain, there's a mysterious aliveness that transcends these categories altogether. Think of a moment in your life when you were broken open by suffering, and in that breaking, experienced a kind of liberation. Perhaps it was the loss of someone you loved, an illness that stripped away your usual identity, or a failure that demolished your self-image. In that moment of apparent devastation, did something else become visible? A spaciousness, a depth of being that your ordinary consciousness had overlooked? We're taught to think of spiritual awakening as an escape from suffering, but the great wisdom traditions suggest something far more nuanced. It's not that awakening removes suffering from our experience, but that it transforms our relationship with suffering, revealing its role in the larger dance of existence. The Buddha didn't teach the elimination of pain, but the end of the particular kind of suffering that comes from our misunderstanding of reality. Christ didn't promise his followers a life without challenges, but offered a different way of relating to those challenges. The invitation isn't to transcend the human condition, but to fully inhabit it, with all its joy and sorrow. When we begin to glimpse this, even momentarily, something profound shifts in our orientation to life. We stop measuring the quality of our days by the ratio of pleasure to pain and begin to appreciate the rich texture of experience itself, which includes both light and shadow, ease and difficulty. I'm reminded of the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, highlighting rather than hiding the cracks. The broken places become the most beautiful aspects of the piece. What if our suffering serves a similar function in the artwork of our lives? What if the gold that fills those cracks is the light of awareness itself? There's a freedom that comes with this recognition. Not the freedom from suffering that the ego seeks, but the freedom to fully experience whatever life brings without resistance. The freedom to say yes to the totality of existence, which includes both pleasure and pain, both joy and sorrow. This yes isn't a resigned acceptance of something we wish were otherwise. It's the profound recognition that life in its fullness includes all these dimensions, and that our suffering, rather than being a mistake or punishment, is part of the intelligence of life itself speaking through us. The great mystic Rumi put it beautifully when he wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Not despite your wound, but through them, precisely through what seems most broken and painful, the light of awareness finds its way into your life. And so we return to our starting point, but with a new understanding. Your suffering isn't merely an unfortunate accident or a problem to be solved. It's the universe, life itself, God, if you will, speaking to you in the most direct way possible, inviting you into a more authentic relationship with reality. The question isn't whether this communication is happening, it's always happening, but whether we're willing to listen, not with the ear of the mind that seeks explanations, but with the ear of the heart that can hear the deeper message beneath the noise of our pain. In the end, what God speaks through our suffering isn't a message of condemnation or even of comfort as we usually understand it. It's an invitation to discover what we are beyond our usual identifications, to recognize the awareness that is already free, already whole, already at peace, even in the midst of life's inevitable turbulence. And perhaps this is the ultimate paradox, that in our willingness to fully meet our suffering, we discover that who we most deeply are was never suffering in the first place. Like the sun that remains unchanged by the clouds that pass across it, our essential nature shines through even the darkest moments of our human journey. This isn't a truth that can be grasped by the thinking mind alone. It must be lived, experienced directly in the laboratory of your own awareness. And life, in its infinite wisdom, will provide you with plenty of opportunities to test this for yourself, to discover the freedom that doesn't depend on the absence of pain, but on a new relationship with everything that arises in your experience. What awaits you on the other side of this discovery isn't an escape from the human condition, but a full embrace of it, a yes to life that excludes nothing, that can hold both the joy and sorrow of existence in the same open hand. And in that openness, you may find what you've been seeking all along, not the elimination of suffering, but the peace that passes understanding, that includes and transcends all the dualities of human experience. In the end, God speaks to you through your suffering, not to punish you, not even merely to teach you, but to awaken you to what you already are, the boundless awareness in which all of existence, including your pain and your joy, arises and returns home, like waves in the vast and compassionate ocean of being.